Alright, so after 2 months, basically non-stop videos through September and October, I'm just about ready to take a break from all this. But before we do get to end this sort of streak with doing what's basically my favorite thing to do here, which seems appropriate, which is talk about Emily Blunt and her new movies. And with this one, with Pain Hustlers, I was going into it kind of half and half, because no matter what, I'm going to go into an Emily Blunt movie excited because I just want to see her act. And it was also the case of, like, when it came out, my birthday had been like a week and a half before, so it was like getting another Blunt movie as like a gift, basically, so that was nice also. But at the same time also, when you look at the subject matter, the whole opioid thing, it does feel like with Dope Sick and all the documentaries, it does feel like it's kind of territory that is... I mean, not that this isn't territory that should constantly be in the light, but that kind of keeps it from getting buried. But as far as, like, bringing fiction into these stories, where this starts as, like, a non-fiction story, the source material is non-fiction, but then, to my understanding, a lot of fiction kind of came into the script. And doing that does feel like there's other directions we can go, and it's something you might want to rely more on documentaries and like nonfiction books and stuff like that, to where we don't have to play it out too much in the fictional world. So otherwise, it's going to feel sort of like oversaturated and stuff like that. But and the problem with that also is when stuff gets oversaturated in entertainment, it tends to get it loses its power as it goes, and that's not something we want to happen with this crisis at all. So that was kind of pulling me away from being, like, really overly excited. And the other thing being that the director is David Yates, whose basic claim to fame is like half the Harry Potter movies and the Fantastic Beasts movies. To his credit, I think this is the first David Yates movie I can remember that didn't have the aesthetic of a storm cloud. So it's got that going for it. But the fact that it seemed like it was building itself up to be this sort of Big Short, Wolf of Wall Street kind of thing was a lot of comparisons I heard a lot. And it's like trying to imagine somebody who's so visually bland in like all of his movies, and like all of his movies look exactly the same, trying to do something flashy. I had a lot of questions about what that would be like when we went into this also. So yeah, there was a lot of excitement from me about this movie, but it was basically all Blunt related, a little bit Chris Evans related, but 99.9% Blunt related is why I wanted to see this as soon as it came out, the day it came out. I even have this thing in October where it's like I only watch horror movies in October, and that's just the thing. And it's like the one movie that was an exception to that was I had to watch this the day that it came out. So, I mean, I guess you could say, there's some real-life horror going on here, but that's how I felt going into it, with that sort of optimism on the Blunt side and seeing what she was going to do with a role like this, because it's a really good part, and there's a lot she could do with it, and then the rest of it I was kind of pessimistic about. And I don't want to sound like I basically made up my mind about this movie before I went into it, but I wasn't surprised that pretty much matches up with how I feel coming out of it. I love Blunt in every like every decision she makes as an actress, and every beat that she has here, and every note that she hits perfectly, because of course she's going to. And for the most part, I'm fine with what Chris Evans was doing. I think Chris Evans has kind of found this place where, kind of going off the Captain America thing a little bit, where he's found this sort of area of shady douchebags that he can do really, really well. Like, still to this day, I think my favorite Chris Evans performance is in The Iceman, where he played a serial killer that drove an ice cream truck, who was also a real-life person. And he does excel here. This does feel like maybe somewhat of an extension of like his Knives Out performance a little bit. I actually feel like that's kind of a lazy criticism from me, but it's just a vibe I couldn't let go while watching this character. And I did like the fact that they didn't go down the route of him becoming some sort of, like, them having some sort of involvement, and the way they played with it, where it's like he very awkwardly and drunkenly tries to get her into bed, and she's a character that stands her ground on this not happening, especially with this particular character. Like, especially with this character, it just cannot happen, because that would have been a disaster. And that's where one of the many strengths you can see in this character, where talking about moments like that between the two of them, the opening spends a lot of time sort of building her up before we even meet her through these sort of interviews, like this documentary-like thing that's going on. And Chris Evans is saying stuff like he hopes that she dies and stuff like that, and how she's this traitorous person. And they basically build up this sort of ruthlessness to her as it goes, just in the dialogue and people, like witnesses that know her, talking about her in like the business sense. And then when we meet her, we see that she's in like this very sort of down place, but she has abilities that could make her really, really successful, but she's just such trapped in like a box that she can't get out. Like, she has just enough money to be able to get by, but not, enough to like blow up and become rich like the way she's about to when she meets Chris Evans. Where she can finally use those abilities. Like, we see her use those abilities when she doesn't have money, like when she has to go to her daughter's school and kind of talk her daughter out of trouble, essentially, with the school staff and stuff like that. And it does become this very sort of relatable thing, watching her character in these opening scenes, when it's, where she has the potential, and we know that she has the potential, and she has the drive, but how it's all going to waste just based on the fact that she's just not in the right position to be able to use what she has and what she can do. And so she's just kind of trapped in a corner and just has to do these odds and ends things in order to take care of her daughter, which is the main priority. Because not only is she just super protective of her daughter as it is, but the fact that her daughter also has like a health condition where she has seizures and stuff like that that could potentially kill her. And so when we see these moments where she's like really protective of her, there are these really nice sort of unspoken moments, like when they move into a motel and the daughter, who's very free about herself, just goes over and starts talking to the neighbors. And Blunt does this thing where she walks up behind her, and the whole time they're talking to the neighbor, she has like her whole arm wrapped around her chest. And then there's this sweet moment when they're going to bed, and there's a lot of noise next door, and she like physically uses her hand to cover her sleeping daughter's ear while this noise is going on. And so stuff like that really sets her up as this human being that can't possibly be the person that was being talked about in the opening scene. So there's an excitement as far as the movie coming from that angle of us seeing how this character is going to progress to those moments. But the interesting thing about it is we do see her, like in the business world as it starts, where she has these scenes with Andy Garcia that really, they very much have the vibe of the Julia Roberts, Albert Finney scenes, the early scenes in Aaron Brockovich. And the character Eliza in general just kind of has like a lot of Aaron Brockovich vibes when it comes to like her. Not that I'd want to compare like the great Aaron Brockovich to like a criminal or anything, but as far as like, the passion for it and the strength to basically see through all of the bullshit and get this moment where she can just assert herself into this job in this very important position. And the fact that you completely believe it. It's like, it's not one of those things where you can just kind of see a script working to get a character where it needs to go. We see her, and she can basically use just her abilities of speaking and the way she speaks to people, and has that sort of confidence, that sort of enviable confidence, which you can, even by the way she stands, you can see that sort of enviable confidence in her. And that's obviously something that Blonde can exude with ease. But then there's the other side of this, where things are eventually going to start to crumble, where, like, what they're doing is eventually there's going to be, like, legal pressure, there's going to be, like, even emotional consequences are going to come into it, and just everything is coming down. And it's that where we can see, it's these moments especially, where her performance really shines, because it's almost like this interesting turn of events where we were built up to think that she's like this sort of ruthless character, but what we're actually seeing in these moments where everything's coming down is her like realizing what she's become, and the fact that what kind of makes her a not good person in this story is the fact that she was basically just rationalizing what they were doing because all she could see was, I need to take care of my daughter, and I need to get, and even her mom also. And it's with her mom. There is this case of like it's kind of like she's trying to prove something because she's got a more successful sibling and stuff like that. But there's still a dynamic here that feels very real and really works, and it's a character that we're not. She's a criminal for sure, but we're not fully against her, and I think it's the line that Blunt finds to walk on, that really narrow line that's going to be really important as to how we, the audience, feel about this character. And the fact that we don't like completely turn on her, it shows how great Blunt is and how she was able to find that really specific note that she had to hit very carefully in order to make that happen. But the rest of the movie, like I said, predictably isn't as nuanced. So, obviously, well, the thing about it that I didn't really realize was such a problem until after the fact was the fact of these comparisons it was getting, like The Big Short and The Wolf of Wall Street and stuff like that. These really frenetic, heavily edited movies where it's like, we're getting a lot of different cuts, and it's like showing a life of excess and a life of partying and stuff like that, and drug use and all that. But it's so low energy in how it approaches this style that I'm not even sure that's what it was intended to be. But the more I'm hearing, the more apparently it was supposed to be a movie that kind of felt like that, where it kind of had this frenetic energy, but it's like I wasn't really... I could see the edits, and I could see like the visual choices and the directorial choices, but I never really even got the vibe that it was supposed to feel frenetic. So I think that's a criticism. That's I don't know, but because when you look at it, as far as these choices, you have these moments where like there'll be a freeze frame for emphasis. It's oftentimes in mid scene, and I just kept thinking that I just kept thinking that Netflix was buffering. But no, it was like a choice to emphasize something, I guess. So that kept happening in really weird ways. As far as the editing goes, there's the moment where they talk about going like off label, and there's like this whole thing going on with another company, and it's like there you can see where it's like trying to do something really flashy editing wise and the way it's telling the story in general, but yeah, despite all of these efforts, the movie still feels pretty low energy. And the fact that I think it's supposed to be the exact opposite of that, I think says everything about how this was put together. And because we even get moments where, if you want to talk about the Scorsese factor, like the very famous Scorsese arrest montage is going to happen maybe a couple of times throughout this. And there's just, like, even if you didn't have Scorsese movies to compare it to, because some people might say that's what the only issue is that people are just comparing it to something else when they're not taking it as its own thing, but even if Scorsese movies didn't exist in some horrible, terrible, apocalyptic world only, hopefully, I would think this would still feel very low energy, because the movie's entire pace feels off completely. Like, it's one of those cases where sometimes, especially with movies like this, sometimes I'll check the time, which is obviously especially easy on Netflix, and it's not because I'm, bored with a movie or anything like that necessarily. I'm just curious of how well they're moving the story along and how, how much of a pace they found. And I checked the time like 3 times before they reached the hour mark because I thought we were farther. And it was like, because we kept getting to points where it was like, oh, it makes sense that this is kind of the turning point. And then it's like barely in. But it's also in that case where when it feels like we should be around the hour 20 mark, we're at the 40-minute mark. And it's like it's moving at like half the pace it should be. And that's, I mean, to an extent, it doesn't matter when it's a Blunt movie, because it's like, because I'll watch her all day. I will watch her act all day, and it's fine. But as far as the story and how the story is progressing, that is something that felt very, like it wasn't near at the pace it should have been. And I think, you know, a lot of the flash editing probably isn't helping that also, where it feels like a lot has happened and then we haven't. And then that can kind of be a disaster when it gets to a certain point. And I was talking, and also when you look at the cast that we have, um, you would think like whenever characters can come in, like side characters can come in and just kind of own the movie for a little bit. That's something that could set up a really nice flow also. And we've got a pretty fantastic cast. The trouble is Andy Garcia in particular. I'm not really sure what they wanted out of him because as he starts to have more and more of a mental breakdown as the movie goes on, I was never really sure if that was for comedy's sake or if it was for like urgency's sake. Like if it was to feel like the more Garcia's having a breakdown, the more out of control this is getting, the more in danger they potentially are, and the more this is falling apart. But I didn't really get either of those. I didn't find it, except for like a line here and there, because Andy Garcia does have the ability to like just say like one line in like kind of a frantic way, and it can be really funny. He's done that in multiple movies. But here, like I said, I didn't know what they were doing with it. If they were trying to blend, it's funny while also making things feel urgent and like suspenseful of where this is going. It's definitely not a good blend as far as the way these scenes play out. So, regardless of where the Andy Garcia scenes are coming from, I think they fall short of whatever the hell they were trying to do. So, and then one of the biggest crimes of the movie, maybe the biggest crime of the movie, is Catherine O'Hara is here quite a bit, and she obviously has a crucial role, but she still feels really underutilized. And having Catherine O'Hara and then underutilizing her, people should go to jail for that, honestly. And it's like when you think about the fact that Catherine O'Hara's in this movie, that in itself is really exciting. And then you've got the other layer of Catherine O'Hara's not just in this; she's playing Emily Blunt's mom. And it's like that combination is like this every time they were on screen together, it should have been just absolute gold. And through no fault of either one of them, the character just feels underutilized. Really, she serves a purpose to the story, but there's no like magic in their scenes together the way it feels like there should be. And I feel like that's from a writing standpoint, I would say. So, because we know what both of them are capable of, and there's just not anything here that just really comes off the screen and really makes you feel something, except for when Blunt gets to those really great moments, but also every now and then we get a focus on the patients and getting to know the patients and their backstories and how they're handling the drugs and all that. And there's something special in those moments, but they're pretty few and far between. And a lot of it is just this sort of dragging on that the movie does. So it's all kind of unfortunate outside of a few elements, but like I said, it's also not really surprising how this movie turned out. It's kind of exactly what I thought it would be, which is also something that could be kind of a big criticism, if you want to call it that. So, we'll see what happens. Obviously, we're going to be excited for whatever Blunt does, even though I have a similar sort of pulling back as far as the Fall Guy, which, interestingly enough, just released like on-set pictures today. I don't know what it is with me about directors named David, but David Leitch is doing the Fall Guy, and like David Yates, I'm not really a fan of David Leitch either, whether it be Atomic Blonde or Deadpool 2 or Bullet Train. I didn't like any of those movies. I passionately disliked Atomic Blonde and Deadpool 2, and Bullet Train was just like I don't know if it's the reliance on cameos or if it's he obviously he can stage action tremendously because he's a stuntman, but like the action in Bullet Train and Deadpool 2 just kind of felt like exactly the same to me. Like they just especially the climax of Bullet Train is just like an exact copy of like action scenes out of Deadpool 2, and his name just really doesn't get me excited. So that's how I'm going into the Fall Guy, but I hope whatever she brings to it, whatever Gosling is going to bring to it, can make it something different. If it's something that feels different from Atomic Blonde or Deadpool 2 or Bullet Train, but still has, like, you know, his ability to stage an action scene, there could be something really special in it, maybe, but for now I'll just do what I did with Pain Hustlers and say, at least it's a Blonde movie. That's all I really want anyway, so there's that. And then she's got, like, the Pinkerton movie also in development, but I've been seeing kind of negative feedback on that, because apparently the character and the whole organization is, like, kind of controversial when it comes to history. I don't really know anything about it, so we'll see what comes of that. I don't know if it's like a Woman King situation or what it is as far as controversy goes, but I guess we'll find out as it further develops. So that's where we are with this, and that's all I have to say for a while, except for our live videos, where we've got the movie club for Tomorrow Never Dies, and we'll have Q&As coming back and all that. So all that stuff is still coming, but other than that, I'm about to take a fucking break. So until the next thing, I think that's it.